Ladies, have you ever imagined a 60-year-old millionaire, filthy rich, discovering he has twin daughters just because a glass of wine spilled on his shirt? Richard Johnson, a CEO living with his dog Dollar, walked into a fancy party, never expecting his life was about to turn into a drama movie. With just one little collision, he meets two girls who look exactly like him. Who are they? What secret awaits him? Let me tell you the story. It's hilarious and touching, guaranteed to have you laughing your heads off while still tearing up. Hello, my dear sisters. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I bet even Hollywood movies would bow down to in terms of drama and emotion. So, are you ready? Picture this, a 60-year-old man, hair streaked with silver, living in a massive villa in California, with more money in the bank than he could ever count, yet so lonely that his only companion is his beloved dog, whom he whispers his heart to every day. That's our main character, Richard Johnson, a millionaire CEO who I'd wager many of you would want to befriend at first sight. Richard isn't the type to flaunt his wealth, mind you. He's rich, but surprisingly down to earth. Every morning, he brews a strong black espresso, sits on his luxurious leather sofa, gazes out the window, and muses, "Yeah, I'm rich, but why does my life still feel like it's missing something?" Have you ever felt that, ladies? You've got money, a house, a car, but there's still this emptiness, like a puzzle piece is missing? For Richard, that piece might just be his dog Dollar. Yep, Dollar isn't just a pet, he's Richard's soulmate. He spoils the dog like it's gold, feeding it prime steak every day and even buying it fancy sweaters for winter. I swear if Dollar could talk, he'd probably say, "Boss, I'm living better than most humans." But ladies, Richard's life isn't just about espresso and Dollar. He's got a hobby that I bet many of you adore too, watching American romance movies. He can spend hours rewatching The Notebook for the 10th time, wiping tears while muttering, "God, why doesn't anyone love me like that?" Once he even tried copying the movies, practicing sweet lines in front of the mirror like, "I'd give you the whole world." But then he'd glance at Dollar yawning beside him and think, "Never mind, I guess you're the only one who gets me, Dollar." See, his life is both hilarious and endearing, right? Then came a beautiful day, or rather, a fateful one. Richard's friends kept nagging him to attend a fancy charity gala. He grumbled the whole time, "Why should I go? Staying home with Dollar and watching movies is way better." But his friend Martha, a sly woman full of tricks, insisted, "Richard, you need to get out, or you'll rot away in that villa." So reluctantly, he put on a suit, tied a tie, spritzed some cologne, though all he wanted was to head straight back home. Before leaving, he even bent down to Dollar and said, "Be good while I'm gone, I'll be back soon. Don't get jealous of anyone."
I imagine Dollar thinking, "Yeah, go wäre fair, just bring him estig to nicht."
So Richard arrived at the gala, stepping in with a polished yet slightly awkward air. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, women glided around in stunning evening gowns, and there he was, lurking in a corner with a glass of wine, unsure what to do. He told himself, "All right, I'll stand here a bit, then sneak back to Dollar." But ladies, life isn't that simple. In one fleeting moment, a glass of red wine splashed onto his pristine white suit jacket, and everything turned upside down. A clumsy waitress spilled it, and as he wiped it off, grumbling, "I knew it, going out as a disaster." She looked up to apologize, and Richard froze. And that's where our story begins, a twist I'm sure will leave you all gasping. Can you guess what happened? Just one spilled glass of wine turned Richard from a lonely old man into the star of a real-life drama more gripping than any movie. But to find out what happens next, you'll have to wait for me to continue in the next part. I promise, this story will be funny, heartfelt, and exactly the kind of tale us ladies love. So sit tight, grab your tea or coffee, and get ready to laugh your heads off and shed a few tears with me.
Allrecht, ladies, here comes a good part.
Richard stood there, his white suit jacket now a glaring red like he'd just come back from a dye job, wiping it with a napkin while his face was still scrunched up in annoyance. As he wiped, he muttered to himself, "Okay, Richard, calm down. It's just a jacket, take it home, dry clean it, and it's fine. But why do I feel so flustered all of a sudden?" Before he could make sense of the strange feeling in his chest, the clumsy waitress, the one who just turned him into a living artwork, looked up. And oh my goodness, ladies, guess what happened? Richard nearly dropped the napkin.
Her Name ist Emily. Let's call her Emily, okay?
With big round blue eyes, a refined high nose, and that shy mumbled apology, looking so much like a younger Richard that he had to rub his eyes a few times. He thought to himself, Wait a sec, why does she look like me? Could I have a long-lost cousin or something? But before he could ask, Emily scrambled to pick up the broken glass pieces, stammering, I'm so sorry, let me pay for your jacket.
Pay for it? Richard almost burst out laughing.
He glanced at his jacket, probably worth more than her monthly salary, and mused, pay with what?
Your soul.
But he didn't say it out loud, he just stood there, flustered and curious, staring at her. Then things got even wilder. Emily suddenly turned and yelled, Sophie.
Sophie, come help me.
Another girl rushed over, and ladies, I swear if Richard wasn't shocked, I'd be shocked for him. Sophie, Emily's twin sister, was her mirror image. Same blue eyes, same high nose, same petite frame. The only difference was Sophie's ponytail versus Emily's high bun. The two sisters stood side by side, looking at Richard with a mix of embarrassment and worry, as if they feared he'd blow up and sue the whole restaurant. But Richard? He was beyond anger now. He stood frozen, his mind spinning, thinking, one person looking like me, okay, I get it, but two?
What in the world is going on?
He tried to stay calm, giving the girls another glance. Emily kept her head down, while Sophie snuck peeks at him, as if thinking, what's wrong with this guy? He's staring at us like we're ghosts. Richard took a deep breath, telling himself, no way. I must be stressed and imagining things.
But, why is my heart racing like this?
He started recalling those romance movies he loved, The Notebook, Sleepless in Seattle, scenes where the hero uncovers some earth-shattering family secret. He mumbled, am I actually in a real-life movie right now? But I'm not even as good-looking as Tom Hanks. Don't you find it hilarious, ladies? There's Richard, jacket soaked, hands trembling, mind wandering all over the place. He looked at Emily and Sophie, then down at the shattered glass on the floor, thinking, no, this is too weird. I've got to figure this out. Before he could speak, Emily hurriedly said, sir, please sit down, we'll get you a clean towel. Sophie nodded in agreement, and the two dashed off, leaving Richard alone amid a buzzing crowd. He caught snippets of chatter, that guy must be some big shot, he looks nice but wow what bad luck.
Richard wanted to yell, bad luck? I'm in shock over here.
But ladies, this is just the beginning. Richard stood there, still holding the damp napkin, his head swirling with a million questions. He thought of Susan, his ex-wife from 35 years ago, a woman he'd once loved passionately but parted with quietly.
Could it be, no, impossible?
He shook his head to dismiss the crazy idea, but the gut feeling only grew stronger. He told himself, Richard, you're old and imagining nonsense. But if you don't get to the bottom of this, you won't sleep tonight. And so, from a guy who just wanted to go home and cuddle dollar, Richard stepped into an adventure he never saw coming. We're not done yet, ladies. The story gets even more intense, but I'll keep the suspense for the next part. Picture Richard standing there, comical yet bewildered, his heart a tangled mess. Don't go anywhere, I'll tell you what he does with this strange hunch next time. He stood in the middle of the hall, his vest soaked, clutching a napkin while his eyes were glued to Emily and Sophie as they scurried away. He took a deep breath, trying to untangle the chaos in his mind. All right, Richard, calm down, he told himself. It's probably just a coincidence. There are plenty of people who look alike in this world. But, two people resembling me this much? That's a bit odd. He glanced around and noticed some of the women at the party eyeing him, whispering things like, that guy must be drunk, he's standing there like a statue. Richard overheard and wanted to shout, drunk?
I'm in shock over here.
He decided he couldn't let this pass like some weird dream. Richard tossed the damp napkin onto a table, adjusted his tie, even though it was soaked too, and muttered, no way, I've got to get to the bottom of this. Otherwise, when I get home and Dollar asks, what's wrong with you? What am I supposed to say? He walked toward Emily and Sophie, who were cleaning up in a corner of the room, his heart pounding like it did on his first date decades ago. But before he could speak, Emily turned, startled to see him.
Oh, weshalb are you here?
We're already apologizing. Sophie, standing nearby with a broom, nodded. Yeah, don't be mad, we'll pay for your jacket. Richard nearly fainted from amusement. He waved it off. No need to pay for the jacket. But, can I ask you something? He hesitated, scanning the two girls from head to toe, then asked, how old are you two? Emily frowned.
34. Verbsilon do you ask?
Sophie chimed in, "Are you trying to hire us or something? We're just waitresses, not CEO material." Richard almost chuckled, but his mind started doing the math. 34 years old. 34 years ago, wait a minute, could it really be? He froze, eyes wide, while the girls stared at him like he was an alien. Ladies, at this moment, Richard wasn't the grumpy old man anymore. He stood there, his mind replaying an old reel of Susan, his ex-wife from 35 years ago. Back then, he was a broke young guy riding a rickety bike, head over heels for Susan, but they parted ways because life was too tough. He remembered her saying, "Richard, if you don't get your act together, don't blame me." After that, he threw himself into building his fortune, becoming a CEO, but he never heard from her again.
Could it be?
Susan had a kid and didn't tell me, he wondered, hands trembling, a mix of anxiety and excitement bubbling up like he just stumbled upon buried treasure. He looked at Emily and Sophie, trying to keep his voice steady.
What's your Mutters Name?
Emily blinked, surprised. Susan. Why do you ask? Sophie added, "Our mom passed away, did you know her?" Richard's heart nearly stopped. He stammered, "Susan, which Susan? Was it blonde Susan who loved grilled cheese sandwiches?" Emily nodded.
Yes.
How do you know that?
Sophie tilted her head.
This guy's weird, he even knows mom's favorite food. Richard was speechless now, just standing there, face pale, thinking, "Oh my God, this isn't a dream, is it? These two, are they really my daughters?" But ladies, before Richard could ask more, Emily and Sophie were called away by their manager to keep working. They bowed politely and dashed off, leaving Richard alone with his wet jacket and a racing heart. He watched their retreating figures, telling himself, "No, this is huge. I've got to figure it out, or I'll be up all night with Dollar." He returned to the party table, but his mind was no longer at the gala. He thought of Susan, the two girls, and wondered, if I really have kids, what then? I've got no experience being a dad.
Sie, ladies?
Just one spilled glass of wine plunged Richard into a drama wilder than any movie. He stood there, comical yet flustered, his emotions a tangled mess. He told himself, "Richard, you're old, and now you're dealing with this. But if they're really my daughters, my God, your life's about to change." And that, ladies, was when Richard decided he wouldn't let this fade away. But what he does next? You'll have to wait for me to tell you right after this. I promise, it gets better. Funny, touching, exactly what you all love. After that fateful party, he returned home with his mind buzzing like someone had just stuffed it with a pile of unanswered questions. He stepped into the villa, looked at Dollar sprawled out on the sofa, wagging his tail in delight, and could only sigh, "Dollar, can you believe it? Your boss just met two girls who look exactly like me when I was young." Dollar tilted his head and yawned, as if to say, "I don't get what you're talking about, but give me some steak and we'll figure it out later." Richard plopped onto the chair, cradling his head, muttering to himself, "No way, I can't let this slide. If Emily and Sophie are really my daughters, oh my God, what do I do?" Ladies, have you ever been in a situation like this? A bombshell secret drops out of nowhere, and you're torn between wanting to know and being terrified to find out? Richard felt the same. He grabbed his espresso, took a sip, and decided, I've got to investigate. Otherwise, I'll dream tonight of Susan showing up asking, "Why didn't you look for your kids?" And I'll be done for. He opened his laptop and Googled, "How do you know if someone's your child?" The results popped up with articles like at-home DNA tests, or recognizing your kid by their facial features. Richard read them and nearly laughed himself silly. Recognize them by their face? Those two are spitting images of me, what more do I need? But then he thought, no, it's got to be scientific. DNA's the surest way. So Richard called Tom, an old friend who worked as a private investigator. His voice trembled slightly over the phone. "Tom, I need your help. I think I might have two daughters, but I'm not sure. Can you get DNA samples?" Tom chuckled on the other end. "Richard, you're old and still stirring up drama like this?"
Allrecht, but you've got to tell him is a whole story.
Richard recounted the party, the spilled wine, Emily and Sophie's blue eyes. Tom, after listening, teased, "If they're really your kids, I'll have to start calling you Dad from now on." Richard grumbled, "Quit joking around and get to it."
il paio double.
But ladies, getting DNA samples isn't as easy as it looks in the movies. Richard couldn't just march up to Emily and Sophie and say, "Hey, give me some of your hair." So he relied on Tom to figure it out. Tom suggested, "Go back to where they work, pretend to be a customer, and I'll handle the rest."
Richard broke out in a sweat.
Pretend to be a customer? If I mess up, they'll see right through me. But with no other options, he agreed. The next day, he put on the most ordinary shirt in his closet, though it was still designer, and drove to the restaurant where Emily and Sophie worked as waitresses. He walked in, picked a table near the counter, his heart pounding like it was his first date all over again.
Richard ordered a coffee, sneaking glances around.
Emily was carrying a tray of food, and Sophie was wiping down a table not far away. He thought to himself, "My God, they really look like me. That high nose, those blue eyes, they've got to be mine." But before he could stare longer, Emily suddenly turned, spotted him, and jumped.
"Oh, you're the guy from the other night. You're back."
Richard fumbled, Yeah, just here for coffee." Emily smiled. "You're not still mad about the jacket, right? We felt so bad." Richard quickly waved it off. No, I've forgotten it. Keep working." But inside, he was screaming, "Forget it? I'm here trying to prove you're my daughter."
"The ladies?"
Richard was so awkward, yet he still tried to play the normal customer role. He sipped his coffee, eyes glued to Emily and Sophie, thinking, if I can just get a hair or something from them, I'm set. But how to do it? He hadn't figured that out yet. Tom, waiting outside in the car, texted, "Hurry up, I'm getting antsy out here." Richard read it and wanted to cry. Hurry?
I'm not James Bond.
But the story doesn't end there, ladies. The next part is even funnier and more dramatic, so stay tuned for me to continue.
Allrecht, ladies. Let's head back to the restaurant with Richard.
There he was, sitting with a coffee cup in hand, eyes locked on Emily and Sophie like some amateur detective. He told himself, "Richard, stay calm. Just get one strand of hair, and you're golden. Easy." But ladies, easy? Hardly. He was so clumsy that while stirring his coffee, he spilled it all over the table. Emily noticed, rushed over with a rag and laughed. "You're acting weird today, why so jittery?"
Richards face turned red, stammering, the coffee's too hot."
But inside, he was screaming, "Hot? I'm about to die from nerves here." He glanced at Emily's high ponytail, thinking, just one strand, how do I do this? Then he recalled those action movie scenes where the hero drops something to create a distraction. So Richard deliberately let his spoon clatter to the floor, exclaiming, "Oh sorry, I'm so clumsy." Emily bent down to pick it up, and he quickly reached out, aiming to snatch a hair. But before he could, Sophie swooped in from nowhere, handing him a new spoon. "Here, use this one." Richard jolted, pulling his hand back with an awkward grin. Thanks a lot." He looked at them, muttering to himself, "Good grief, they're so quick, how am I supposed to get a hair now?" Don't you find it hilarious, ladies? Richard, old as he is, trying to play spy, but so awkward he nearly got caught red-handed. He sat there, hands trembling with the new spoon, his mind racing for another plan. He thought, fine, no hair, what else? A glass they drank from? Chopsticks they used. He scanned the room and spotted Emily setting a tray down on a nearby table. On it were some glass cups, likely ones the girls had used during a break.
Richard's eyes lit up.
That's it. DNA from a glass should work. He texted Tom right away. "Tom, can you get DNA from a water glass?" Tom replied, "Sure can. Grab it, I'll handle it."
And so, Richard sprang into action.
He pretended to get up for the restroom, then slyly passed by the table with the tray. He glanced around, no one was watching, and swiftly slipped a glass into his coat pocket. But ladies, he forgot his coat was one of those thin designer ones. The glass poked out, making him look like he'd just shoplifted from a store. Sophie walked by, saw it, and blinked in surprise. "Sir, what are you doing with that glass?" Richard panicked, forcing a laugh. I like this glass, thought I'd take it home as a souvenir." Sophie frowned.
"A souvenir? That's weird. Let me get you a new one."
Richard waved her off frantically. No, this one's fine." Clutching the glass, he bolted to the car, heart pounding like he'd just escaped a bank heist. Once outside, Richard handed the glass to Tom, exhaling in relief. He wiped his sweat, saying, "My God, I've never been this stressed."
Getting one glass felt like a mission impossible.
Tom burst out laughing. "Richard, you'd starve as a spy. But all right, one glass is enough. I'll send it for testing right away." Richard nodded, but worry gnawed at him. What if they're really mine? What do I even say to them? He glanced at Tom, asking quietly, "Tom, do you have kids? Is being a dad hard?" Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "It's tough, but you'll manage. And if those girls are yours, congrats on becoming a dad at 60. Richard felt a mix of joy and fear. Sitting in the car, he stared at the glass in the plastic bag Tom held, thinking, "Susan, if you left me 2 daughters and never said a word, you're something else." He pictured Emily's smile, Sophie's quick move with the spoon, and wondered, if they're mine, how do I make up for all this time? But the story's not over yet, ladies. That glass was just the first step. The test results and what happens next are even funnier and more touching. Wait for me to continue in the next part. I promise you won't be disappointed. After handing the glass to Tom, Richard returned home feeling like he was sitting on pins and needles. He stepped into the villa, saw Dollar sprawled out on the sofa wagging his tail in greeting, and could only sigh, "Dollar, you won't believe this. Your boss just stole a glass. If the cops catch me, you'll have to visit me in jail." Dollar yawned as if to say, "Whatever you did, just make sure I get my steak tonight." Richard slumped into a chair, turned on the TV to kill time, but his eyes kept darting to his phone, waiting for Tom's message. He muttered, "Why is it taking so long? What kind of DNA test takes this much time? Are they digging for gold or something?" 2 days passed, and Richard was nearly driven mad with anticipation. He paced around the house, brewing coffee 1 minute, whispering to Dollar the next, "Do you think I have kids? If it's true, you'll have to share your steak, you know." Dollar gave him a side eye, as if thinking, "Dream on, the steak's mine." On the 3rd day, the phone finally rang. It was Tom, his tone serious. "Richard, sit down. The results are in."
Richard's voice trembled. "Tell him don't drag it out."
"Are they mine?" Tom chuckled, "Congrats, you're officially the father of twin girls. DNA matches 99.9%. Richard nearly dropped the phone. He shot up shouting, "Oh my God, really? I have kids for real." Dollar jolted awake, barking as if to ask, "What's wrong with you?" Richard collapsed back onto the sofa, hand on his chest, overwhelmed with joy and shock. He mumbled, "Susan, you're incredible. You had kids and hid them from me for 34 years. What's the deal with dropping this on me now?" He looked at Dollar, grinning ear to ear. "Did you hear that? I have 2 daughters. Emily and Sophie are really mine." Dollar tilted his head, yawned again, as if saying, "Yeah, congrats, but what's that got to do with me?" Don't you find it touching, ladies? Richard, 60 years old, thinking he'd spend his life with just Dollar for company, suddenly a father to 2 beautiful girls. But the joy didn't last long before worry crept in. He wondered, now what? How do I tell them? If I just show up saying, "Hi kids, I'm your dad," they'll think I'm nuts. He called Tom back, asking, "Tom, you've got kids, right?"
"What do you do now?"
Tom teased, "Buy them gifts, cake, flowers, whatever. Girls love that stuff." Richard nodded, "Sounds good. But I've never bought gifts for daughters. What do I get?"
Tom laukhet. "Just pixometing, jurerich."
"Buy them a car if you want." Richard chuckled, but then he got serious. He remembered Emily's smile, Sophie's quick move with the spoon, and thought, they've probably had it tough, working as waitresses. Did they even get a proper education? If I don't say anything, who's going to take care of them? He stood up, pacing again, his heart a mix of joy and confusion. He thought of Susan, those days when they were in love. "Susan, if you were still here, you'd probably laugh at me. I'm this rich and didn't even know I had kids." He sat down, grabbed a pen and paper to write something for Emily and Sophie, but stopped. "No, I need to meet them. Face to face." But ladies, meeting them wasn't that simple. Richard had no idea what they thought of him, some strange old guy in an expensive suit who'd snuck off with their glass. He mused, "They probably think I'm a creep. How do I make them believe me? He held the DNA results Tom sent, reading them over and over, then sighed, "All right, I'll give it a shot. If they don't believe me, at least I tried." He looked at Dollar, saying, "Stay good at home, okay? I'm off to meet my daughters. If it works, I'll bring them back to hang out with you."
Dollar just leitere, as if thinking, go vere fer, just on bota me.
The drama's not over yet, ladies. Richard's about to step into a confrontation full of tears and laughter, but how he gets Emily and Sophie to accept him. You'll have to wait for the next part. I promise, it only gets better, funny, heartfelt, the kind of story that'll leave you teary-eyed and glued to every word. Alright, ladies, here comes the thrilling part. Richard Johnson was now certain Emily and Sophie were his daughters, but he couldn't just sit at home hugging Dollar and daydreaming forever. He resolved to meet them and reveal the truth, though his heart fluttered like he was about to retake his driver's test. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, he told himself, "Richard, you're 60, you've run a multi-million-dollar company. Why are you scared to face your own kids?" But then he glanced at Dollar sprawled on the sofa and sighed, "You wouldn't get it, Dollar. Being a CEO is way easier than being a dad." Dollar yawned, as if to say, "Worry all you want, I just need my steak." Richard grabbed the DNA results, tucked them into his pocket, and drove to the restaurant where Emily and Sophie worked. On the way, he imagined every scenario. Will they hug me with joy? Or scream, "Are you crazy?" and chase me off? He parked, took a deep breath, and stepped inside with a confident air, though inside, he was shaking like a leaf. He picked a table near the counter, ordered a glass of water, no coffee this time, too afraid of spilling it again. Emily spotted him and grinned. "Back again? No suit jacket for us to ruin today, huh?"
Richard fawcett a smile. No, today.
"I'm here to talk to you both about something." Sophie overheard, dashed over with a rag still in hand, curious. "What's up? Are you treating us to dinner to make up for the jacket?" Richard shook his head, summoning his courage. "No, it's not about the jacket. I want to talk about your mom, Susan." Emily frowned. "Our mom? You really knew her?" Richard nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes. I was married to Susan, 35 years ago." The girl's jaws dropped, staring at him like he'd just fallen from Mars.
Sophie burst out laughing. "Are you serious?"
"Mom never mentioned you." Emily nodded. "Yeah, she only said our dad was some poor guy on a bike who took off." Richard nearly choked. His face flushed. "That was me, poor on a bike, it's true. But I didn't take off, Susan and I just split up." He pulled out the DNA results, placed them on the table, his tone serious. "I know it's hard to believe, but this is proof.
Jure my daughters.
I had the DNA tested." Emily and Sophie glanced at the paper, then at each other, then back at Richard.
Sophie cracked up. Jure hilarious.
"You think we'd buy this? You're a rich CEO, we're waitresses. How's that connected?" Emily agreed. "Exactly. You must have watched too many movies. Great story though."
"Sie, ladies?"
Richard thought spilling the truth would settle it, but his daughters shot him down without mercy. He stood there, clutching the paper, utterly bewildered. He tried to explain, "No, I'm not making it up. It's real. I didn't know Susan was pregnant. If I had, I'd have found you long ago." But Emily crossed her arms. "Sir, if you're trying to hit on us, you don't need to pull this stunt. We're not into rich old guys." Sophie chimed in. "Yeah. Go hang out with your dog."
Richard wandte zu CY. "My dog? Dollar?"
"But I'm telling the truth." Before he could say more, the restaurant manager called Emily and Sophie back to work. They waved goodbye and dashed off, leaving Richard alone with his crumpled DNA report. He watched them go, muttering, "Man, being a dad is tough. They don't believe me, now what?" He took a sip of water, his mind a tangled mess. He thought, maybe I came on too strong. If I were them, I wouldn't believe some random old guy saying, "I'm your dad," either. But he didn't give up. He told himself, "Richard, be patient. Being a father doesn't happen overnight." The story's not over yet, ladies. Richard's already been mistaken for a creepy old flirt, but what he comes up with next to convince Emily and Sophie? You'll have to wait for the next part. I promise, it's funny and touching, the kind of tale that'll have you laughing hysterically and tearing up all at once. After being bluntly rejected by Emily and Sophie, Richard sat dazed in the restaurant, clutching the DNA results with a face like someone had just splashed him with cold water. He stared at the glass of water on the table and sighed, "My God, I'm this rich, this powerful, and being a dad is harder than negotiating with business partners." He stuffed the paper into his pocket, stood up, and headed to his car, feeling a mix of sadness and amusement. On the drive home, he muttered, "Do they really think I'm some creepy old flirt? If I were hitting on anyone, I wouldn't have spent 60 years with Dollar." Back home, Richard flopped onto the sofa, glancing at Dollar yawning beside him. He whispered, "Dollar, have you ever had kids who chased you off?"
I just got brutally shoot down by my own daughters.
Dollar gave him a lazy look as if to say, "I don't care what you're rambling about, where's my steak?" Richard chuckled, but then he got serious. He thought, "No, I can't give up. If they don't believe me, I'll prove it with actions." He stood up, rummaged through a drawer, and pulled out an old photo, a picture of him and Susan when they were young, him on a rickety bike, her beaming beside him. Staring at it, he murmured, "Susan, if you were here, you'd probably know how to talk to them better than I do." He decided to return to the restaurant, but this time, not empty-handed. He called Tom, asking, "Tom, what do girls like? How do I make them believe me?" Tom teased, "Get them flowers. Every girl loves flowers. Add some cake too, sweetness melts them right away." Richard nodded, "Sounds good." So he drove to a florist, picking out a huge bouquet of red roses, though he had no clue if they liked the color. Then he stopped by a bakery, grabbing a box of chocolate cupcakes, thinking, "Who doesn't love chocolate? I was crazy for it when I was young." Standing by his car mirror, he held the flowers and cupcakes, practicing, "Hi girls, it's your dad, Richard. I brought you flowers and cake." But he stopped, shaking his head, "Too cheesy, they'll think I'm flirting again." At the restaurant, Richard walked in with the bouquet in hand and the cupcake box tucked under his arm, looking like an awkward old guy about to confess his love. Emily spotted him, surprised, "You're back again? What's with the flowers and cake this time?" Sophie dashed over, giggling, "Are you proposing to someone here?"
Richard blushed, stammering, "No, no."
"I brought these for you too. I mean, for my daughters.
I'm your dad.
Emily crossed her arms, "Sir, you said that last time. We don't buy it. Stop with the act." Richard tried to stay calm, setting the flowers and cake on the table and pulling out the old photo. "Look at this. It's me and Susan, your mom. I'm not making this up." Sophie picked up the photo, studied it, then whispered to Emily, "Hey, this guy does look like us when he was young. But why didn't Mom ever mention him?" Emily shook her head, "Probably just a coincidence. He's so rich, how could he be our dad?" Richard overheard and wanted to cry, "I got rich because I worked hard after splitting with your mom. I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had, I wouldn't have let you two struggle like this." Sophie laughed, "Struggle? We're fine, sir. Stop acting, go hang out with your dog." Emily nodded, "Yeah. We'll take the flowers and cake, but no more weird stories, okay? Don't you find it hilarious, ladies?" Richard tried so hard, only to get mercilessly shut down by his daughters again. He stood there, staring at the flowers and cupcakes on the table, his heart a tangled mess. He thought, "Man, why is being a dad this hard?"
They don't believe me, what now?
He was about to say more, but the manager called Emily and Sophie back to work. They grabbed the flowers and cake, bowed to him, and dashed off, leaving Richard alone in the middle of the restaurant. He sighed, "Susan, you left me two girls as stubborn as you.
What do we do now?"
But ladies, Richard wasn't one to give up easily. He still had one final weapon to convince them, and the next part will be even funnier and more touching. Wait for me to continue. I promise it'll have you laughing and tearing up all at once. He stood in the middle of the restaurant, watching Emily and Sophie disappear behind the counter with the flowers and cupcakes in their hands, his heart feeling like it had just been squeezed tight. He sighed, muttering, "My God, why is being a dad this hard? I brought flowers and cake, and they still think I'm some creepy old flirt." He sat back down, ordered a glass of water, too afraid to get coffee again, lest his shaky hand spill it, and told himself, "Richard, you can't give up. They're your daughters, you've got to be patient." But he glanced at the crumpled DNA results in his pocket, thinking, "This paper's useless. If they don't believe me, 100 more copies won't change a thing. Sitting there, his mind spinning, he suddenly recalled a detail Susan had once shared when they were in love. He shot up, murmuring, "That's it." Susan loved singing, and her go-to song was Somewhere Over the Rainbow. If they know that song from her, they'll have to believe me. He grabbed his phone and texted Tom, "Tom, find me Emily and Sophie's address. I need to see them outside work hours." Tom replied, "Are you nuts? What if they call the cops on you?"
Richard shot back, "I don't care, I kent weit an humore."
Tom sighed but sent the address anyway, a small apartment a few blocks from the restaurant. Richard drove there, clutching the old photo and DNA results, his heart pounding like he was about to confess his love for the first time. Standing at their door, he took a deep breath and knocked. Emily opened it, jumping when she saw him. "You? How'd you know we live here?" Sophie rushed out, arms crossed. "Are you stalking us?"
"What's your deal now?"
Richard waved his hands frantically. No. I just want to talk. I know you don't believe me, but hear me out just once." Emily frowned. "Don't call us your daughters, it's weird." Sophie nodded. "Yeah."
"Warte for you way got to say, make it quick."
Richard took another deep breath and began, "I knew your mom, Susan, through the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Back then, she'd sing it every night, her voice sweet as candy. I still remember her saying, 'Richard, if we have kids, I'll sing this to them.'"
Emily and Sophie frotze.
Sophie stammered, How do you know that song? Mom really sang it to us." Emily nodded, "It's true. But she never mentioned you." Richard gave a sad smile, "Because we split up before she knew she was pregnant. I had no idea, not until I met you two at that party." He pulled out the old photo and handed it to them. "Look, this is me and your mom. I'm not making this up." Emily took it, studying it closely, then whispered to Sophie, "Oh my God, it's real. He looks so much like us when he was young." Sophie still hesitated. "But why didn't Mom say anything? You're this rich, how could you let us grow up without knowing our dad?" Richard bowed his head. "I don't know either. Maybe Susan was mad at me, or didn't want me in your lives. But once I found out the truth, I couldn't just sit still." He pulled out the DNA results, his voice breaking. "I'm not asking you to call me Dad right away. I just want you to know how late I was in finding you." "Are you tearing up yet, ladies?" Emily and Sophie stood there, their eyes starting to well up. Emily held the paper, reading it over and over, then looked at Richard. "If you're telling the truth, why didn't you find us sooner?" Richard replied, "I didn't know. If I had, I wouldn't have let you two work as waitresses, struggling like this." Sophie burst into tears. "We're not struggling. Mom raised us well, don't say that." Richard flinched, quickly adding, "I didn't mean it like that. I just want to make it up to you." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is a letter I wrote.
If you don't believe me, read it, I won't force you."
Emily and Sophie stared at the envelope, then at Richard. The silence was suffocating. "But ladies, the story's not over yet. Will they read the letter? Will they forgive Richard? You'll have to wait for the next part. I promise, it's funny and heartfelt, the kind of tale that'll bring tears to your eyes while keeping you hooked."
Allrecht, ladies. Here we are at the tear-jerking, Laugterfillet finale.
Richard stood at the door of Emily and Sophie's apartment, his trembling hands placing the envelope on the table before stepping back as if afraid they'd throw it in his face. He said, his voice choked, "I won't force you to believe me. But if you want the truth, read the letter."
"I'll go now."
He turned, walking out, his heart heavy as if he'd just left his whole world behind. Emily and Sophie stood there, staring at the envelope, then at each other. Sophie whispered, "Hey, should we read it?" He looked so sad. Emily nodded, "Yeah, let's read it. If he's lying, we lose nothing." The two sat on the sofa and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Richard, his writing a bit messy since he hadn't written by hand in ages. It read, "Emily, Sophie, I didn't know Susan was pregnant when we split. Back then I was poor, with just a rickety bike, and Susan wanted a better life. I threw myself into making money, but I never forgot her. When I met you at that party, I was stunned. I'm not good at being a dad, but I want to try.
If you can forgive me, I understand.
I just hope you know how late I was in finding you." At the bottom, he'd drawn a little heart and added, "Dollar wants to meet you too." Isn't that adorable, ladies? Emily finished reading, her eyes teary, whispering, "Oh my gosh," he drew a heart. "What's this dollar thing though?" Sophie laughed through her own tears. Probably his pet dog. This guy's weird, but I feel kinda bad for him after reading this. They looked at the old photo Richard left behind, then at the DNA results. Emily sighed, "If he's telling the truth, Mom hid this from us for so long." Sophie nodded, "Yeah, but he didn't know either."
What do we do now?
Emily held the letter, saying softly, "Maybe, meet him again? We'll ask him everything." Sophie agreed, "Yeah, call him back." So Emily grabbed her phone, found Richard's number, he'd left it in the letter, and dialed. Richard was driving home, nearly swerving off the road when the phone rang. He answered, voice shaky, "Hello?
Voices.
Emily replied, "It's me, Emily. Can you come back? We read your letter." Richard nearly cried, "Really? I'm turning around right now." He floored it, heart racing with joy and fear. He told himself, "Richard, don't mess this up. They're giving you one last shot." He parked in front of the apartment and stumbled up, looking as awkward as a schoolboy facing a teacher. Emily opened the door, saying, "Come in. We've got questions." Richard stepped inside, sat on the sofa, hands clasped tight as if bracing to be kicked out again. Sophie held up the letter, asking, "Are you serious? You really didn't know Mom was pregnant?" Richard nodded, "Absolutely. If I'd known, I wouldn't have let you grow up without a dad." Emily looked at him, eyes still red. "Then why didn't you find us sooner with all your money?" Richard gave a sad smile. "I didn't know where Susan went after we split. I only ran into you by chance at that party. I was shocked, but so happy."
Sophie Kutin, wo's Dollar, Anive?
"You keep mentioning it." Richard chuckled, "My dog. He's at home, probably waiting for me to feed him steak."
Emily and Sophie burst out laughing.
Emily said, "You're so weird."
Rich and Reisinger dog like that.
Sophie nodded, "But, if you're really our dad, what do we do? We're not ready to call you dad." Richard nodded, "I get it. I won't push."
I just vanta chance.
The two exchanged a look, and Emily said, "All right, we believe you. But don't expect us to call you dad right away, okay?" Richard grinned ear to ear, "Fine by me."
Call me Richard if you want.
Are you tearing up yet, ladies? The story's getting warm and fuzzy now, but it's not over. Richard and his daughters have more hilarious and heartfelt moments ahead. Wait for the next part. I promise it'll have you laughing and crying all at once. Richard sat on the sofa in Emily and Sophie's small apartment, his hands still clenched as if he feared they'd change their minds and kick him out. He grinned ear to ear, "So you believe me now? I'm not dreaming, right?" Emily crossed her arms, saying, "We believe you, but don't get too excited. We still need to check if you're for real." Sophie nodded, adding, "Yeah. If you're faking it, we won't let it slide." Richard nodded eagerly, "It's real, I swear. I'd even swear on Dollar."
Emily burst out laughing. "Dollar again.
Do you love that dog more than us?" Richard waved his hands frantically, "No. Dollar's my buddy, but you two are my daughters." Sophie stood up, grabbed the bouquet and cupcake box Richard had brought last time, and set them on the table. "All right, since you brought these, we'll give them a try. If they're good, we might believe you a bit more." Richard's eyes lit up. Eat. They're chocolate cupcakes. I picked the best ones." Emily opened the box, took a cupcake, bit into it, and nodded, Pretty good. You've got decent taste in cake." Sophie tried one, grinning, "Bet these cost a fortune, huh? But we're not that easy to win over." Richard chuckled, "I'm not trying to bribe you, I just want you to be happy."
Feeling warm yet, ladies?
The three of them, father and daughters, sat around the table, eating cupcakes and chatting, though Emily and Sophie still kept a testing vibe with him. Emily asked, "You're so rich, living in a huge mansion, why'd it take you so long to find us?" Richard sighed, "I didn't even know you existed. After Susan and I split, I threw myself into work, made money, but I never heard from her again. I lived alone, just me and Dollar. If I hadn't run into you at that party, I'd still be clueless about having daughters." Sophie frowned, So you were lonely?
No wife, no kids, just a dog. Richard nodded. Yeah, pretty lonely.
But now I've got you too, and I'm over the moon. Emily looked at him, her tone softening. If you're telling the truth, Mom was weird for not telling us about you. Richard gave a sad smile. She was probably mad at me. Back then, I was broke, couldn't provide for her. Maybe she wanted to raise you on her own, so I wouldn't interfere. Sophie nodded. Mom was tough. We grew up fine, even if we're not rich like you. Richard looked at them, his eyes gleaming. I can see that. You're amazing, just like your mom. I only regret not being there for you growing up. Emily blushed. Stop with the compliments. We're not used to you being all mushy yet. Then Richard suggested, how about you come visit my place sometime? Meet Dollar, see where I live. Sophie laughed. Meet that dog, huh? You're obsessed with it. Emily nodded. Fine, we'll check it out. But if you're tricking us, we're out of there. Richard lit up like he'd struck gold. No tricks, I swear.
I'll pick you up tomorrow, okay?
He stood, tempted to hug them, but hesitated. Emily noticed and giggled. No hugs yet, we're not there. Richard grinned awkwardly. All right, we'll take it slow. He left, feeling lighter, telling himself, Richard, you did it. They're willing to see you, that's step one. The next day, Richard drove to pick up Emily and Sophie. He wore a simple shirt, no suit, to avoid being teased as the rich old guy. They climbed into the car, looked around, and Sophie asked, You drive this fancy car all by yourself? Richard smiled. Yep, just me and Dollar until now. With you two, it's finally a full house. Emily glanced at him. Don't think we're moving in, okay? We're just visiting. Richard nodded. I know.
Take it easy.
He drove to the villa, his heart racing like he was bringing VIP guests home. Ladies, the story's heading toward a reunion. Richard's taking his daughters to his place. But what happens when they meet Dollar and see his life? Wait for the next part. I promise it'll be funny and heartwarming. The kind that'll have you laughing hysterically and tearing up. Richard drove Emily and Sophie to his villa, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding like it was his first job interview. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing his daughters in the back, curious yet cautious. Emily peered out the window, saying, You live in a huge place like this all alone? Doesn't it get boring? Richard smiled. It does. But Dollar kept me company, so it wasn't too bad. Now that you two are visiting, I'm thrilled. Sophie jumped in. Dollar again. That dog's really important to you. Richard nodded. Yep, he's my soulmate. But you two mean even more. The car pulled up to the villa, a luxurious home with a flower garden and a sparkling pool. Emily stepped out, jaw-dropping. Oh my gosh, this looks like a movie set. You're this rich and didn't find us sooner. Richard sighed. I didn't know you existed. If I had, I'd have brought you here ages ago. Sophie looked around, teasing. So now that we're here, what are we supposed to do?
Clean the house. Richard laughed. No. You two just relax. I'll handle everything.
He opened the door, leading them inside, his heart feeling lighter, like a burden had been lifted. As they stepped in, Dollar bolted over, barking excitedly and wagging his tail. But when he saw Emily and Sophie, he paused, tilting his head as if asking, Who are these people? Richard bent down, patting him. Dollar, meet Emily and Sophie, my daughters. Don't be jealous, okay? Emily giggled. This dog's adorable. But he's looking at us like we're enemies. Sophie knelt, waving. Come here, Dollar. Don't worry, we won't steal your steak. Dollar trotted over, licked Sophie's hand, and all three, father and daughters, burst into laughter. Richard said, See? Dollar likes you already. Richard gave them a tour of the house. He showed off the living room with its plush leather sofa, the kitchen with a fridge stocked full, and the movie room where he'd watch The Notebook. Emily raised an eyebrow. You like romance movies? That's not very CEO-like. Richard nodded. Yep, I'm a sucker for sad ones. But with you two here, I don't think I'll be sad anymore. Sophie teased. Then don't cry during movies anymore. We don't know how to comfort you.
Richard laughed heartily. Deal, I promise.
He led them upstairs, pointing to an empty room. If you ever want, this room's yours. I've kept it empty for years. Emily blushed. No way, we're not staying yet. One step at a time. Then Richard invited them to dinner. He'd called a chef to whip up a small feast, steak, salad, dessert, everything delicious. Sophie took a bite, eyes widening. Wow, this is better than the restaurant where we work. Emily nodded. You sure know how to live. Richard smiled. I want you two to enjoy it too. From now on, let me take care of things. They looked at him, and Sophie said quietly, So, if you're really our dad, what do we call you?
Dad, Felsviat.
Richard quickly replied, Call me Richard, that's fine. We'll get there. Emily nodded, Okay, Richard works. But don't expect hugs anytime soon. Richard grinned, No problem, I can wait.
Here is the climax, ladies.
After dinner, Richard pulled a small box from a drawer and handed it to Emily and Sophie. He said, These are necklaces I bought for Susan when we were young, but I never got to give them to her. Now I want you to have them. Emily opened the box, revealing 2 silver necklaces engraved with an S, her eyes welling up. These were Mom's. Richard nodded, Yep, S for Susan. I've kept them for decades. Sophie took hers, choking up, You.
Richard, Jure not so bad.
They put the necklaces on, then suddenly stood and gave Richard a quick hug.
Richard Frotze, Tier Spilling over Stammering,
I get a hug for real.
Emily Laukhet, Justus Onse, don't get your hopes up. Are you crying yet, ladies?
Richard threw a little party afterward, not a fancy gala, but a cozy family gathering with just the 3 of them and Dollar. He looked at his daughters, thinking, Susan, I found our girls. Here's the closing line, ladies, life's unpredictable. Sometimes happiness comes from the most unexpected places, doesn't it?
Allrecht, ladies, the story of Richard, Emily, and Sophie is and over yet.
After that surprise hug, Richard decided to turn their little family gathering into a tradition. Every weekend, he'd pick up his daughters and bring them to the villa, where they'd cook together, watch movies, and swap stories. Dollar became siblings with Emily and Sophie, no longer jealous about sharing his steak. Richard even bought 2 bicycles, just like the rickety one he used to ride with Susan, so the 3 of them could pedal around the park. Emily teased, Richard, you're old, can you still ride a bike? He laughed, old but still spry, I'll prove it to you both. Sophie shouted, Watch out, don't fall, we're not strong enough to catch you. As time passed, Emily and Sophie started calling Richard Dad without hesitation. He set up a scholarship fund for them, helping them attend college, something Susan had always dreamed of. One day, Richard stood before a framed photo of Susan in the living room, whispering, Susan, I did it. Our girls are so happy. He turned to see Emily and Sophie giggling with Dollar, tears rolling down his cheeks while his smile never faded. Ladies, happiness sometimes comes late, but with love, every gap can be filled, right? Now, if you found this story both funny and touching, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I've got more real-life dramas, better than any movie, to share with you, from clumsy old guys like Richard to tough women like Susan. Subscribe so we can laugh, cry, and find joy together every day. Thanks for being here with me, ladies. See you in the next video.